Hey folks, we're going to look at 50 civil rights. There's really three key areas I want to focus on. I'm going to try and get them all into one video, and that would be Brown v Topeka, the bus boycotts in Montgomery, and Little Rock 9. If you keep in mind, we'll start with Brown versus Topeka. Previous video I talked about 1896 and the whole idea of separate but equal, when the Supreme Court said it was okay to have segregated schools, okay to have segregation society, as long as the facilities were separate but equal. Now with schools, occasionally you would get a separate, where they were equal, but most times the black school just wouldn't be as good, and they'd be relying on equipment being handed down when white schools were finished with it. Poor equipment, poor conditions, poor classrooms, just awful places to go. Now, a man called Oliver Brown would test out this when his daughter, Linda Brown, who was basically primary school pupil, was told that she'd have to go to an all-black school. Now, Topeka is in Kansas, okay, so she's in Topeka, Kansas, and she basically is told you're going to have to walk 21 blocks to get to your nearest school, when you've got a white school which was better 7 blocks away. So it was very, very easy to get to the school 7 blocks away. It was in walking distance, but to go 21 blocks, this poor kid was going to have to walk down through even a train crossing yard, which was incredibly dangerous for a kid to do. She was relying on public transport in an age of when there was bus segregation, and it wasn't easy for someone to get 21 blocks to somewhere, because obviously a lot of black Americans couldn't afford cars in that time. So this was a huge issue, and it was just making life very, very difficult. I've walked 21 blocks before, and I know it depends on the size of your streets, but when I did it, it took me half an hour. Now, that was in New York. That was like half an hour, 35 minutes, and I'm an adult, so imagine trying to get a primary school child to do it. It was ridiculous. So the NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Coloured People, got involved, and they said, look, ignore all these segregation laws, register at the nearest school. So that's what Oliver Brown did. He registered Linda at the school 7 blocks away, and it went to the district courts. So it went like the local courts, this matter, and the district courts, as you could expect in Topeka, says separate but equal. Totally dodges the issue of what really was going on, the fact this little girl was going to have to travel 21 blocks, and says, yeah, black children could be better in a mixed school, but the schools are all the same, so we don't need to do anything. So they're trying to sidestep the issue. Now, this is where it gets big. 17th of May 1954, the Supreme Court, they have the ability to go against the president if needs be, steps in, and they said no, segregation should end. So it's a huge victory straight away that the Supreme Court's got involved and came down on the side of black Americans. The problem was they didn't give a deadline, so nothing would really happen, because they haven't said, oh well, in a year's time you're going to have to end this segregation. They just said it had to end. So the victory was the Supreme Court got involved. The problem was they didn't actually give any time for when this, desegregation would have to happen. And the other problem was as well that Eisenhower, who was now president, didn't want to act on it, because civil rights was like a can of worms that no one really wanted to deal with in power, because obviously if you were seen as sympathizing with black Americans, you'd lose votes. And he said, if we try to force desegregation, and it's, this is his view, if you try to force desegregation, it won't work. It has to be more organic. Now, you can tell Brown versus Topeka was a threat, because KKK membership rises again following this. So you can see the publicity it's got, and the Supreme Court support really kicks off some problems here. Now, outcomes of this, well, in March of 1956 there was 22 Southern senators, politicians, said the Southern Manifesto was brought out saying they would do everything they could to end this. And in January of 56, all elementary schools in Topeka were organised by area rather than skin colour. So there were victories came out of that. Now that brings us to Rosa Parks. Basically, the bus issue's been a problem, it's been challenged before. Rosa Parks wasn't the first person to do this, and this wouldn't be actually the first time she'd been involved in issues on buses. But December the 1st, 1955, she broke the bus segregation law again. And basically she was told by a white man to move, as by the time she was sitting on the bus was in the when black Americans would have to move, she was seen in a whites only part of the bus, and she said, "No, my feet hurt." Right, and she refused to move. The driver stopped the bus, tried to get her to move, she said no, and she was arrested. Now, Parks was sacked from her job. Remember, she's in Montgomery, Alabama. Huge racist attitudes in Alabama, massive problems. And she worked as a seamstress in a department store, and the department store didn't want to be seen as attached to Rosa Parks. If they kept her employed, it could affect their profits because they were employing someone who'd challenged the system and the way of life in the South, so they sacked her. So Parks went to the NAACP and she said that she was willing to become a test case for them. And there was a one-day boycott of the buses started, and it basically went on over a year, right? And what happens is black Americans started to become organised, and they start to say, right, we'll walk to work, or we'll carpool. So in other words, those of you who do have cars will share the cars, we'll split the petrol costs, and we'll almost set up like a taxi system where it was a way of hitting the bus companies in their pockets. If you want to have a successful protest, hit them in the pocket. Now, black Americans not having cars, the bus companies would have been serving a lot of black Americans, and what you saw was the Baptist churches and the like, people like Martin Luther King, who was at this point in time in Montgomery, Alabama, organised the carpooling, and they basically said, right, what we're going to do is we're going to organise where people can be picked up, we're going to get people to and from work, to and from where people need to be, so that means the protest is likely to continue. If you weren't going to get to work, if you were going to lose your job, if it was going to cost you more money, it would have failed. So the protests were really organised in the Baptist church, where a lot of the black community would have gone to. And you can see the threat that this had, because King was arrested by the racist police force for speeding. Right, he was one of the ones with the car. He saw the porch of his house bombed. Other carpool drivers were arrested. People waiting for lifts from them were arrested for loitering. You know, like, oh, what you're doing here, you're hanging around with bad intent. So the police did everything they could. The authorities did everything they could to make the bus boycott fail, and it didn't work. And it lasts for over a year. And over 17,000 black Americans were thought to have refused to use the bus services in Montgomery, Alabama. Now, it took 1 week to set up the carpools. 1 week, so that's how organised black communities were becoming. And there was about 200 vehicles involved in this. A lot of them linked to the churches and run by the churches. So, the result again is a huge victory, not just for the organisation of the community, not just because Martin Luther King got involved, but because the Supreme Court got involved again, and they said bus segregation was now illegal, and they brought a law in which would be, so they actually set a date for it, where action was going to take place, and the new law would begin on the 20th of December 1956. Parks had to leave Montgomery because the racist people didn't like that she'd stood up to them, and she had to move to Detroit, but she actually kept working for the NAACP, and she was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by Bill Clinton in 1996, and she was involved with self-development for people. She was also involved in a Pathways to Freedom project, so she was absolutely huge even after civil rights, hence this this godmother, this grandmother of civil rights title that was bestowed on her. Now, back to education. We've got the Little Rock 9, and Little Rock is in Arkansas, and basically the Supreme Court have already said segregation was illegal in schools, but they haven't said when. So, like other states, Arkansas really had done little about this. There'd been little effort to put this right, but the Arkansas press didn't agree. So in 1957 the Arkansas State Press started a campaign to try and force desegregation, to try and make it happen. The school boards thought something should happen, you know, at least we should start setting the balls rolling on this, and the mayor of Little Rock said, yeah, we need to start doing something as well. Sadly for Little Rock, the governor, Orville Forbes, didn't agree, and he was going to make life incredibly difficult for what was about to happen. Now, a group of students, hand-picked students, were registered at Little Rock High School. Now, they were known as the Little Rock 9, but they were actually more than 9 at the beginning, but obviously the number dropped to 9, and these were selected as intelligent and resilient students. So students who would give a great account of themselves in schools, in this Little Rock High School which they were going to go into, but also ones who, it wasn't, you know, there were under no illusions, they were going to face a tough battle. And basically the governor, Orville Forbes, called in the National Guard to stop the Little Rock 9 attending school, right? So these black students weren't going to be allowed to attend, and the Little Rock 9 were going to be stopped by the National Guard. First day, didn't turn up. Second day, when they were meant to go in, the National Guard stopped them. Now, as I said in a previous video, this was televised. It caused massive shock when people could see what was happening on TV to people who just wanted to go to schools. And the TV's getting bigger and bigger, and people were going home from work on a night time, switching the TVs on, and for 18 days and nights people were watching Today in Little Rock and the horrific events that were happening to people who just wanted to go to school. And basically Eisenhower is now under pressure to do something about this, and he tried at first to get Orville Forbes to obey the ruling, and Forbes is just saying no. So this is going to become a clash between Eisenhower and Forbes, which we'll come to in a second. But the students on September the 23rd did get into the school. They came by delivery entrance, so they were almost sneaking into the school. And then you see an angry white mob in the streets, and there's videos on YouTube of this, where they basically start attacking black people in the streets, using terror to try and get their point across. And they also attacked northern journalists, saying, well, you're the ones who are writing about this, you're the ones who are filming this, you're the ones who are photographing this, making people sympathetic to this black cause. Mind your own business. It's got nothing to do with the North. So there were tensions there from the North and the South that had never really gone away following the Civil War. So there was hell on in the streets about this as well. The police did very little about it. They were similar with the mob. They had similar views. They didn't want to see the black pupils be allowed into a white school. And in the end, Eisenhower has enough, and he sends in 1,100 paratroopers to make sure the Little Rock 9 get into the schools, and he makes them stay there till November, and then he tells the National Guard, you do not answer to Forbes anymore, I'm the president, you answer to me. And he overruled Orville Forbes. Now, outcomes, well, 8 of the 9 students stayed for the year. Only 1 graduated, but a lot of them did go on to have successful lives. 4 of the parents of the children lost their jobs, so it was the same as Rosa Parks. People didn't want to be seen as supporting the civil rights movement, and people who were actually making a noise to try and end segregation. But 4 years later, only 3% of Little Rock students were black. However, if nothing else, Eisenhower has acted, the president's involved, and the rest of the USA has seen what's really going on because of the television and the power that's having. Thanks for watching.